Are you listening? Huckabee GOP State of the Union uses trans to say LGBTQ plus is not normal. Regardless of who wins the Republican nomination for president in 2024, Trump, DeSantis, or someone else who may emerge, it is clear what the LGBTQ plus community has in store from the rhetoric of the culture war and hate. This week was the first State of the Union where the GOP now has a slim margin in the House. Arkansas Governor and former Trump White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee minced no words over what's ahead for LGBT. After all, she is the first woman that led that state. She comes from one of the nation's most notorious evangelical families and noted Baptist preacher, father, and presidential candidate himself, Mike Huckabee. So this week, she paraded out his greatest hits and a few new ones of her own.
I'm the first woman to lead my state, and he's the first man to surrender his presidency to a woke mob that can't even tell you what a woman is. In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. But you get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery shelves, and our children are taught to hate one another on account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country. Whether Joe Biden believes this madness or is simply too weak to resist it, his administration has been completely hijacked by the radical left. The dividing line in America is no longer between right or left. The choice is between normal or crazy.
Well, the most important battle cry is to frame you are either with the GOP or you are crazy. Representative democracy and compromise seems to no longer be needed or required, much less wanted. The battleground lines were drawn in contrast to President Biden. This week, Utah's Governor Spencer Cox discussed what he thinks is actually going on in this radical culture war in America.
How do you stop? It's mostly coming from your party. We saw there's over 299 bills that have been introduced. 2/3 of them this year alone, 2/3 of them target trans people. And again, 1/2 of 1%. Yeah. You just made the point yourself. What is this obsession?
Well, I think it is a growing number. In fact, it's a vastly growing number. If you go back just 10 years ago and look at the numbers, and here's the problem. This has become such a toxic issue that it's hard to have a rational conversation around it. I actually had to look outside the United States to get data. I looked at what happened in Sweden, look what happened in Finland, look what the French are saying about this, the explosion that they're seeing in those numbers, and some concerns about this. It's not just about providing care or not providing care. It's about whether we might potentially be harming young people, not having enough evidence to see what the long-term results of this are, and providing better psychiatric help for those young people who are going through this.
But you took this power away from parents to make this decision. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, we take power away from on a lot of things involving our young people. If there is potential long-term harm for our kids, we need to find that. And what Utah did was just push pause until we can get better data. We have a mandate in the bill to go out and look at the best data all across the country and then make a decision.
You've talked about, I'm running out a little low on time, but there's a state senator in Kentucky who did a very impassioned speech earlier this week. Her son committed suicide.
Yeah.
Her son's trans.
Yeah.
And she was basically begging the legislature to stop these bills that are targeting, because it's making these folks feel like targets.
Yeah. And that's the hardest part of this. That breaks my heart. What we're doing is we're increasing funding for our LGBTQ community to help with these issues. And so it's, again, if we could get outside of the culture war piece of this and have these kind of rational conversations, I would feel much better about it. I fully admit there are people on my side of the aisle that are targeting these, that do not have their best interest at heart.
So Governor Huckabee claims of normal versus crazy is now the new normal from the leadership of the GOP. In 2010, for example, the same state that elected Bill Clinton governor made Mike Huckabee the longest-serving governor in the state's history. In 2010, his presidential aspirations were largely considered radical in the GOP. In 2023, they're red meat. We remind you of the Huckabee clan when he said about HIV, quote, "We should isolate the carriers," end quote. On gay marriage, he suggested judges who rule in favor of it should be impeached. Local ordinances protecting LGBTQ+ should not exist at all. Huckabee supports gay conversion therapy. And about the LGBTQ+ community, he said, quote, "We can get into the ick factor, but the fact is that two men in a relationship or two women in a relationship, biologically, that doesn't work the same," end quote. The Huckabees oppose LGBTQ+ adoption because, quote, "children aren't puppies," end quote. And the Huckabees want to bring us back to the good old days when he said, quote, "In our lifetimes, we've seen our country go from Barney Fife to Barney Frank," end quote. So that was the State of the Union minority voice this week in February of 2023. The contrast seems to be very clear. It truly is a battle line between normal and crazy. It's interesting to me that they would select Huckabee. She's a woman. She's the first female governor of Arkansas. I think that they thought that gave them bonus points in standing up to Biden in contrast. But what was really surprising here is the Huckabee name as a brand in America is among the most evangelical conservatives in the country. When she was press secretary for Donald Trump, her voice was really, really clear. Her voice was more radical than Donald Trump's was as press secretary, and frequently was criticized for going too far over the line. And in just 2 years, that's who the Republicans would say in the first State of the Union for him, with them taking control of the House by that slim majority of just 6 seats, or 8 seats, I believe, that her voice would do it. So they're literally throwing the gauntlet down and saying, this is who we are, this is what we are, and we would be really foolish not to believe them.
Mm-hmm. Well, you also have to remember, yes, this is red meat. She is trying to out DeSantis, who is busy out-Trumping Trump at this point. But the message, who was she talking to? She was talking to people who follow these events very closely, who hit refresh on Politico and The Hill on both open browsers multiple times a day. Yes, this is their message, but I think the choice of picking her goes a long way towards saying, because she's a recognizable face from the Trump administration and to a lesser extent from her father's administration in Arkansas. They're saying this is the face we can put forward, and she wasn't fire breathing, she wasn't all of this. So for the people that they wanted to talk to, I think this is a bullseye. It's a complete miss for the vast majority of swing voters in swing states.
John, hearing that though, what is your feeling of her soundbite for LGBTQ? I mean, she did lots of things,
yeah.
But her soundbite is it's our normalcy, we're normal, yeah. And everything else is crazy. What do you make of that? That's a radical position.
It's shocking, but not shocked. I mean, I've been paying attention the last few years to where the country is going and where Republican rhetoric has been going. And this really, it may be the first time that she said something this explicit, for lack of a better term, but this message has been out there for a while. They're just starting to crystallize it, and that's what we should be concerned, because they're starting to essentially focus group on the faithful.
Now you say it. Did it surprise anybody that she was willing to be so crystal clear? It's us, and that's it.
No, she was waiting for this opportunity, Al, and she was ready, willing, and able. And I think that if you would have given her this spot, but during Trump time, she would have still been the same way. So I mean, and let's talk about Spencer Cox. Like, oh my God, everything that was coming out of his mouth was just horror to me. It was making my ears bleed. Just isolate the folks that have AIDS. Okay, this is shit that we dealt with back in the 80s. And this is like, just to hear these words come out of somebody's mouth that is followed and respected scares the living crap out of me. It just really does. We shouldn't be able to adopt because children aren't puppies. Like, this is how low down the totem pole they think of us. They see us just like animals and worthless, crazy people.
And they want the rest of the world to see us that way because they spew lies. Where do they go to come up with people that they can treat children like puppies. We all know lots of gay couples that have children that are growing up just fine, if not better in some cases, than if they were in a heteronormal situation. And I just think for Huckabee, her voice, it was just angry. She's been wanting to be angry for a while, and she put it out there.
I'm curious to that point. Are we going to find a position to defend against this? I don't hear it currently, but are we going to find a place where we go, okay, this is how we're going to stand up and fight this? Because I don't know what that is yet.
I think there's a level of crazy that even the radicals are going, wait, that is just too much. We have neighbors and friends that are not like that. I don't know that, like, I'm hoping that they shoot themselves in the foot by taking such a strong stance, as opposed to a bigger fear would be for them to pretend to be moderate, you know, and then we would not know what we're getting because they would never do that. Listen to them.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, and then, you know, Spencer, he starts screaming about the science, that they need more data. They need more data, that he's going to other countries to collect the data. So get the freaking data, because the data's not there. All right. And if you follow science, then you need the data to follow science, you know? So how are you going to have all these anti-LGBT that are mainly anti-trans, let's be real about it, without the science backing it? So, okay, so pay for the science then, because we need it.
But
the thing is, trans issues are not anything that moderates vote on. This was dedicated to shoring up the red meat of the red base. It doesn't, moderates don't say, oh, she's really anti-trans and I guess I don't like, you know, boys in women's bathrooms at school, so I'm going to vote for them. It doesn't affect them. And the same at our end of the scale, a lot of our allies, they still vote more. The pocketbook issues are still more important than trans. So this was really just about rallying at the start of a new Congress, which has started to falling flat on its face. This was just about rallying them up and saying, this is how we're going to lock you down, because they lost a lot of the hardcore red meat people in districts that they needed in Congress in the last election.
LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.